Well, it would be a brave or a foolhardy person who would attempt to summarize in a few quick categories and elegantly turned sentences the range of topics that we discussed as part of the psychologically informed boundaries discussions in season 1. So here goes. Uh, but as you might expect from a discussion around emergent practice in pies, uh, the the issue of relationships cut across and underpinned just about everything that we discussed. Relationships, not just in the more obvious sense of the way that a staff and a service relates to its service users, customers, clients, members, or whatever, but also in the way that the staff to staff relationships and staff to themselves in terms of the way we manage our own personal boundaries, but certainly boundaries within an organization, staff roles and management hierarchies. That came up a lot more, of course, in the top to toe discussion. To some extent, user to user, customer to customer relationships as well, in terms of what kind of community and social roles people can take on within their own community, and the extent to which those provide positive role models, which counterbalance, therefore, any more difficult decisions and discussions that you may have to have around boundaries. And interestingly, the issue of boundaries with other organizations came up too, although again, in the top to toe embedding, we talked about horizontal embedding as well as vertical. Because it cuts across everywhere, you can't really fit these things neatly into the big 5 themes of psychological awareness and so on, because everything is multifaceted. But um, I think the first topic we covered a lot was the issue of getting your de-escalation in first, getting your de-escalation processes in early. That is partly by forefronting the relationship, but also there were a number of techniques that we discussed, such as wellness action planning, to sit down with somebody at the start of their involvement with your service and discuss with them what could go wrong and how they would wish the service to respond. What are the triggers? What should we avoid doing? And again, one of the interesting issues was not to do that too soon, or rather to do a preliminary version and revisit it once the individual is a little more settled, feels a little more secure discussing some issues with you. So that kind of contract setting that some organizations regard as being really important. Yes, but don't go for a one-off contract. Do make it part of a process of engaging and discovering new areas that you want to perhaps work on together. Obviously, in the issues of understanding somebody, in particular to understand anger, to understand evasiveness, to understand truculence and rebelliousness and so on. We'll touch on that a little bit later on, I think. But some of the techniques and tools for understanding conflict are particularly useful. The drama triangle came up a lot as one of the ways to think differently about confrontations and boundaries and the way that that can split a group. Um, and one service in particular talked about having exit interviews with when somebody does have to move on in unfortunate ways or circumstances, to sit down with that individual and say, so we didn't get it right with you, or this didn't work, did it? But the implication being that we could try again another time, perhaps. So there were no permanent exclusions necessarily. And so that relationship, the potential in the relationship, can continue. And that reflects some of the discussions that there have been about how the role of the staff sometimes is to hold the hope for somebody who finds it too difficult to hope for their own future, for themselves. And sometimes that hope doesn't necessarily need to be with yourselves, but you can convey the impression that there might be another time when we're more ready, you're more ready, but making it neutral like that both sides aren't quite ready, aren't there yet. trying to get something in writing on it as to how that was used in one particular organization that developed it. But overall, the underlying theme here was around reframing the nature of the encounter and reframing the nature of the ending, so that it isn't necessarily such a punitive event, but more a part of a ongoing life and process. And that reframing of the wording and the context came up as the other main theme in terms of the language that we use, the language of warnings and eviction notices, and how often the rules of an organization can be expressed in terms of how do we keep you and other people safe? How do we make it safe and okay for everybody to be here? And what would you make of the way we do it? In other words, it becomes a discussion. We've talked a lot about signage that you have in the posters in a reception area in particular. And in fact, these discussions were followed by a really, really useful, almost a pop-up seminar Q&A opportunity with Jill Pavley of Design Resources for Homelessness. And it's very much worth looking at her observations, really, really useful observations on the layout of an area and the subtle, implicit, unspoken messages that the built environment can give. We did look at staff relationships and using the self, one's self, is an important part of making relationships. And there are boundaries as to how far people are willing to go and when you might be reluctant to give too much of yourself whilst keeping it in and whilst making the relationship important. One of the issues around working as a team and trying to make sure that people support each other takes us again into the staff's boundaries between themselves. And some people have used wellness action planning with and for the staff. How do we keep you well and healthy working in this kind of situation? Again, a different frame, but particularly useful perhaps for those services that will have former service users, former homeless people, former people with abuse problems, now working as peer mentors or as fully paid staff, that to actually break down the distinction between we do this with our service users and we do something completely different with staff. And that takes us into the issue of the difference between a pie-minded approach to staff welfare and the difficulties that staff can get into, and the kind of issues that HR might require and might expect of a service as the proper way to handle disciplinaries and other such dispute issues. Which takes us into the issues of how the relationships within an organization, particularly with the larger organizations which have sometimes more remote, more disengaged support service functions. And that again came up a lot in the top to toe embedding discussions, which if you're interested in that, that's the way to look for those kind of issues. Again, the drama triangle came up as an interesting way to look at the potential for conflict between different organizations, when one organization has this role in someone's life and this organization has another role, and it's very easy for those roles to polarize between organizations as well as within a team between individual workers or levels of management within a team. The drama triangle is full of insights, not only on spotting and understanding those dynamics, but also finding what they call the winner's triangle, the way to steer through those difficulties. Again, very, very useful. Finally, there's a lot of work being done, particularly in the States, around the Housing First program on interagency eviction programs. So that if you have one service which provides the housing and another that provides the support, you actually have a three-way contract there between the service user, the support provider, and the housing provider. And all three can be involved in making sure that the communications between you all are as you would wish them to be, as you would need them to be, with the individual, the service user, having some opportunity to have a say in what information they would actually want to have shared and what advance warnings they would like everybody to be upfront about, rather than keeping something as confidential and so on. For some people that would work well. We shouldn't make it the default expectation that's then expected of everybody. You need to have a discussion, in other words, with each individual and each network of services. So other ways, again, to prevent, to intercept a problem that might crop up by thinking around the boundaries of your own service. There were other issues around service boundaries, around leaving. When someone leaves, particularly with the pressure there is of throughput of people, because we have so little funds and we have to move people on as fast as possible, when often they will have unmet needs, not fully resolved as people, but then who is? So when you have individuals who have moved on, but would like to keep some kind of contact with the service that they've come to trust, to what extent is that acceptable? To what extent can you make space for that within the contract? And a number of ways of looking at membership as a multi-layered way of working your way out of a service. A lot of clubhouse services, for example, work on that basis. I myself worked in an adolescence unit that had a membership model for people who had moved on and could remain part of the community for so long as they wished to, with a right, because they paid a membership fee. So it's a different kind of relationship from the we are the service provider and you are the user and you're the ex-user. Those things are very accident prone as ways of working. So if we can find ways around that, it is good. We talked about positive roles and participation and the way that creates a different set of channels. But underneath all of this, of course, there's the issue of how services respond and reflective practice, seen as both the way to balance in each situation some of those dilemmas of how much personalization, how much treating people differently can you do? How far can you really allow elastic tolerance without other people feeling that you're giving special treatment to some others? Only within the group and only within the staff group and only within the reflective practice session really can you thrash out those things in the minutiae of detail of, well, how did that happen? What can we learn from a particular incident that went well as well as incidents that went badly? So reflective practice is a great way of trying to get some of the balance, but also as a great way of identifying things that are in the procedures built into the structure of the organization, either from head office or from the way you work locally or from the local commissioning contract and expectations, that reflective practice is sometimes the best way to come up with, do we need to do this? Could we do this differently? And starting to take back to the funders, the managers, whether it's head office or whether it's local commissioners or other providers, could we avoid this situation? Could we do this differently to be more proactive? So not firstly, we talked about getting your de-escalation in early. Well, you can also talk about preempting by looking at some of your procedures and structures and trying to think, could we do this differently at different times? So you're getting that de-escalation in early. Otherwise, in terms of tools for understanding, we talked about the drama triangle. We did talk a bit about some of the ways of understanding anger and understanding swearing. Lovely particular piece of research that I tend to promote a lot, which suggests that people swear when they feel powerless, that swearing makes you feel a bit stronger, not just defensive or aggressive, but actually stronger. And there is research that suggests, well, more than suggests, that seems to demonstrate quite amply, that people actually can lift heavier weights, like, and hold them a little bit longer if they're swearing. Swearing does actually make you stronger. You can put your hand in a bucket of cold, ice-filled bucket of water to the point where it's painful. And if you swear, you can tolerate a bit more. And of course, in childbirth, as we all know, women swear a lot, I'm told. So there are a number of ways of thinking differently about expressions of anger, which is obviously one of the things that worries people most. And there are a few other really useful tools for understanding the window of tolerance. Many people do know, and I'm going to try and produce something on that because there are some really, really elegant uses of the window of tolerance as a way of understanding withdrawal, as well as understanding the people who are very easily agitated and will tend to lash out in a more dramatic kind of way. So look out for that. I'll see if I can try and get something on that sooner rather than later. So that's a bit of a meander around some of the issues that we discussed. I'm not sure how useful it would be even to review that, because in some ways the most valuable thing with all these discussions isn't the content, it's the participating, it's the being there, it's the being involved and talking through with other people. I have said many times that we learn best, we learn most, and I think we learn fastest and deepest when we learn together. And a great thing about the forum discussions we had so far, and hope will continue, is that they really have been very active participating in formal sessions. So that's what I hope we can continue. And I would hope that each new discussion, again, comes from somewhere completely different and comes with somebody else talking about stuff that they've done or something that they found useful. And that's how we share. So that's where we are so far. Looking forward to season 2.